Well, hold on. I'm afternoon. You guys just turned afternoon. So hello, how is everybody doing? So glad to be here. And every time I get on Zoom, I'm gonna refer to something, and some of you might know. I always think of Romper Room because we have everybody's name. I love the head nods. Everybody gets that, right? I see Steve Marker and I see Valerie Bunday and Peggy Wolf, I and that lady's never called my name once during that whole episodes I've ever watched. So I always wondered about that. So we are happy to be here today, and I am very, very thankful that we were asked. As Sherry kind of alluded to, Randy and I are going to introduce ourselves real quick, and then I'm going to go through a quick slide. And I think Randy's going to go through his, and his slide is very, very cool. So what we want to do for you guys today when it comes to church safety is talk about kind of a high level aspect that I'm going to talk about on some items that you should have in place when looking to perform emergency response plans in those areas. And then Randy's and his team has done a phenomenal job of what does it look like, kind of what we call down in the weeds. What is the process that they've gone through? What have they done? And I think you're going to have, by the end of this presentation, a good idea of what it takes to put an emergency plan together and look at safety at the church. Does that sound good so far? Excellent. All right. Now remember, y'all, we're on Zoom, but that does not mean you don't interact. So those of you that have cameras on, I love it. I might ask and talk to you as I kind of flip through. So just kind of bear with me there. So again, my name is Chad Cunningham. I'm currently with the Insurance Board. We are located in Cleveland, Ohio. Some of you maybe are insured. Some of you may not, which is fine. We love everybody. So that's what's awesome. And my background, as Sherry kind of said, I'm 24 years in law enforcement. I made to the rank of lieutenant at the University of Akron in Akron, Ohio. So all my constituents, I got older every year, but my constituents stayed the same between 18 and 25. So I don't know how that happened, but that's how we ended up there. I was in charge of community policing and training for many, many years. I did a lot of training on safety. Currently, the church I attend, I'm part of our safety team and director of that area. So I've kind of helped put some items together and talked about safety throughout the whole state and really the United States. In 2017, I retired and went to work for an active shooter company called Alice. Those of you who've ever heard of the Alice program, usually in schools, some businesses, some houses of worship, went to work for them as a director of training and then a VP of operations, or I'm sorry, VP of education curriculum. And so I went to work for them for a while and then left there and got connected with the IB here from that. So that's a little bit about myself. Couple things real quick, and I'm going to turn it over to Randy to introduce himself. But y'all, it's all about having fun. So during my part, we're going to have fun. We're going to interact. Dad jokes are free. Lucky for you. And we should be good on that. So again, thank you for coming. I appreciate being here. And Randy, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, I attend the Multnomah Presbyterian Church in Southwest Portland, and I am the chair of the personnel committee, and I was charged with sort of leading our task force on this topic. So I'll be sharing sort of our experiences and where we're at. Just understand this is real time for us. Part of why I'm even here is I called up Presbytery to get some information regarding what others are doing, and they all went, "Wow, this is an interesting topic. We should probably engage everyone in the presbytery." So effectively, you're catching real time where we're at. We won't be approving our work for a little bit more time. And so I'll be going into a little bit more of the weeds, as Chad mentioned. I see this more as like a Brady Bunch board rather than Romper Room.
Oh, there you go.
So
absolutely.
All right.
Love it. All right. So we already know Chad talks way too much, but we're going to deal with this. I promise I'll get done quickly with my part and we can jump into Randy's part. So I want to share my screen. And as we do the old verbal concept of Zoom, can you see my screen? It's almost like Verizon's. Do you hear me now? Big thumbs up. Excellent. Hopefully it's the correct screen. Safety at church screen concept. So safety at church. Looking at security plans, developing that, very, very big topics nowadays, especially, over the last 20 years with violent critical incidents and those areas. It's how do we look at our churches as a vulnerable location and what do we have in place? And it seems that we need to be, what are the guidance that we have within our presbyteries, in our other congregations, our places of worship, and even our organizations that we still might be working for, or the areas that we attend. So the first thing I want to look at, and again, I want to take it from kind of a higher level of approach of how do we develop a security plan. Now, in this presentation, you'll see I have a lot of links out because again, I'm not going to get really deep into it because that'd be like a 3 to 4 hour presentation and Randy would never get to talk. And I want Randy to talk. So Sherry's passed this out before and might have some challenges with the PowerPoint. So she's going to pass something out later in a PDF that the links will work for you. But you can go in and go through and see what I'm talking about here. So when we develop a security plan, the first thing you want to do is establish roles and responsibilities. You want to put basically a security plan team together. Who's going to write this plan? Who's going to research it? Who's going to be in charge of putting it all together and sharing it throughout the congregation, throughout the group? And how are we going to look at that? So when you start establishing the roles, it's nice to have people on the team with different backgrounds. And in our congregations, we usually have different people and backgrounds, and you can even pull from outside also. So you should have people like with a security or law enforcement background, somebody that maybe understands a little bit more of emergency management, maybe a mental health approach, an IT approach, because when we start talking about, are we going to have cameras? Are we going to do different things with technology? Might be some good to have somebody on that team that understands those concepts a little bit more deeper. And then even somebody from an insurance group, because again, a lot of the things we might want to do is our general liability and our insurance going to cover and support what we want to do also, or we will have to look at getting an additional, so on and so forth. So when we start establishing those roles and responsibilities and developing that security team, it's very, very important that we have kind of a multi-aspect approach when it comes to that. And that's very, very important because you don't want to miss one of those components because you might be missing an integral part of the plan that you need. Next thing you should do is have a vulnerability assessment conducted. Now, when we look at vulnerability, that's almost a good one to say, right? Say it 5 times. Assessment, these are conducted free of charge from CISA, otherwise known as Department of Homeland Security. It's part of their group there. So they have individuals that will come out to your church and perform an assessment on all your vulnerability aspects. What is your technology like? What's your doors like? What's your locks like? Your windows? What's your accesses? Do you have plans in place, both property and policies and processes? It's a phenomenal report that you get when they come out. And again, it's free of charge. You guys being on that West Coast, you're over in CISA groups, either 9 or 10. And at the end of this, I'll show you some links that will take you out directly to them that you can contact them. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. So once you have that vulnerability assessment conducted, kind of like what you're going through, you want to develop a security plan. Now, I know everybody here has developed a security plan before, and you know exactly what you should have in there. Because it's just easy. It's just, I want this, and it's, let's do locks, lights, and doors, and I can read a book and we're good to go, right? Well, it takes a little bit more into that. And there's tons of templates that are out there. I have linked in this presentation, as you see here. There is a link there that will take you out to a template that you can use through Department of Homeland Security. And it's through FEMA's how to develop a security plan, an emergency operations plan, basically for houses of worship. Now, don't get scared when you look at that approach. It is quite thick, but just kind of read through and see what pieces do I need to basically implement within my jurisdiction and areas. And I'm sorry, as we started looking at this, by raise of hands, I think in the middle of your screens, everybody has a little react button with a little heart. I think you can squeeze that. Who has a security plan already in place within your organization? So Scott's raising his regular hand. Kyle's raising his hand. I see. You can either raise your hand, Mark over there. I got to flip through screens, so I might not get everybody. I see Amanda and Brad. See, it is like, all right, I see Brad Busick up there. A lot of Brads on the phone today. So some of you already have one, and you might use a template from Department of Homeland Security. Even local law enforcement might have plans in place to help and assist when that comes. All right, we got Chris and Daniel. Excellent. So developing a security plan is, again, this is why it's so important to have that team established and those responsibilities and roles and that multifunctional approach to come in and assist as that goes through. Once you have that plan in place, it's then we need to look at how do we exercise the plan. Now, I'm not saying going out and running 5 miles to exercise. What that is talking about is once we have a plan. So I always used to talk when I talked to a lot of different organizations about security planning, emergency operations planning is first you have to have a plan. So once you develop that plan, and those of you that have a plan, awesome. Those of you that don't worry about it. You're not behind. You just have some work to do, right? Once you have the plan, you have to make sure everybody knows that you have a plan. Because if it's only one group that knows it and nobody else does, how do they respond to it? And then you have to practice the plan. And that's that exercise the plan. So CISA, Department of Homeland, and the Department of Homeland Security actually has items that they can do tabletop exercises with you. So a tabletop exercise is very simple of just taking your plan, giving you a scenario. This is what's going to happen. And then how does your plan go around? And how do you talk through it on how do you respond to whatever incident that plan, or I'm sorry, that exercise put into place. So when we look at it, these 4 areas are basically the 4 areas you want to do when it comes to security planning. So far, so good? Everybody rocking?
Chad,
Yes, Sherry.
I noticed that Daniel Browning has a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Daniel. Thank you, Sherry. See, I get all excited. I thought you were just raising your hand, not asking a question. Daniel, do you have a question?
So are you familiar with the Alice training scenarios?
Yes, sir. Are you
Okay.
talking of yeah, I wrote most of them.
Well, okay. Well, our church insurance company sent a bunch of us through that about a half a dozen years ago. And that's been our approach and what we've used, and it's worked very well. And how does it dovetail with some of the stuff we're going through today?
So actually, so anytime you look at a concept of, I like to call them violent critical incidents because we can use these concepts of what that program is for different events, just not that person with a weapon. But when we look at it as those are components of our plan. So we're going to talk about the next slide. And Daniel, is a great flow right into my next slide. So I appreciate it. I'm glad you were able to get the memo I sent you to help me within my program. But it goes into the concept of the training and educating. So when we look at the Alice program that you went through, or any other type of training or program, you always have to have that as part of the training that supports it. So anytime we write a policy and process, we always train on that policy and process. And if in that security plan is, if a violent critical incident is going to happen and we're going to do the Alice program, we need to train everybody on that Alice program. Does that help, Daniel? And we're going to talk about these other ones too.
Yes, it does. And that's what we have done and
Good.
implemented our plan around that. We've got more things to do around how we implement the last parts of it in and around the church, but we've slowly been working on that.
Excellent.
So
no, that's excellent. And nowadays they even have on the Alice website, I think you can buy them. Like I said, I don't work for the team anymore, but we talk about exercises and I'm going to see if this will work for me. There we go. Look at this. So they have now exercise cards that you can use to do tabletop exercises. So for instance, the scenario might be you are looking outside your office window when you see a person in the parking lot walking towards the facility with a long gun. The question would be, what would you do? So let's take that. You see somebody coming out. We see somebody with a weapon coming out of their vehicle in the parking lot. What would you do? What process is? So that's basically what tabletop exercise is. So the programs do provide that. So thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that question. Very good question. So as
I did see a question popped up down here, what Alice training was about. And so I can kind of go through it. The A stands for alert, L for lockdown, I for inform, C for counter, and E for evacuate.
Excellent.
And that
Yeah.
can go in any scenario.
Yeah, and basically the program it's a response. Department of Homeland Security's Run, Hide, Fight is the same approach. This is just a program that really looks at how do you alert, what are you going to do once you get the information? Are you going to lock down, counter, or evacuate? All right. Strategies, philosophies, and concepts on how to increase your survivability, mitigate casualties during a violent critical incident. If anybody has more questions on that, you want more explanation, we can go offline. It's a big concept, so I don't want to take a lot of the time just on that. So it's great. Thank you, Daniel, again. So as we move forward into train and educate, we have this policy, we have it written, we've practiced it, but we do need to train other people. So training is very, very important. We always train back to what our policy is. The policy supports the training supports the policy. So some of the trainings that you should have within your policy and within your organization, I feel, is the power of hello. So this is a program of CISA on the power of hello. Think of it as by just saying hello, how much power you have by doing that. So we look at retail situations that use hello. We think about it last time you went to retail to buy furniture or any of that. What do they always come up? They come up, hi, they introduce themselves to say, hello, can I help you? There's all kinds of information there, but there's a strategy there for identifying, de-escalating that comes with that program also. So that's great, especially with our greeters, our first line of defense out there at the doors. This type of program is very, very good. Same with de-escalation, having a group that has been trained in de-escalation. How do we get people calmed down? And I know you're all thinking, Chad, we're at church. Nobody gets excited at church. Nobody gets angry. Nobody yells. It is church, right? I agree, Peggy. Sometimes we're all human beings. And so when we look at it as human beings, we have challenges and we know how to do it. So how do we look at de-escalating situations? And again, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is CISA. Thanks, Chris, for throwing that out there. You get so used to acronyms, it's just hard to remember that not everybody knows the acronyms. So if you look in chat, you'll see what CISA stands for, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And they took a lot from the Department of Homeland Security also. So de-escalation is a good one. And then some type of active shooter response training, because again, that's what's driving a lot of us to be on this call of how do we put these security items in place. But as we start looking at putting these security items in place, I want you to also think about, we want a security plan, but we also want to make sure it's an emergency operations plan, because how are we going to respond to a medical emergency? How are we going to respond to somebody who's passed out in the sanctuary or has tripped and hurt their legs and arms or whatever the case may be, right? How are we responding to those? That's part of that plan also, and those teams that there should have those. So I just don't want everybody to be, kind of tunneled into only security. Make sure you open up a little bit to get into the FEMA aspects. Department of Homeland Security is more of an emergency operations planning as we go through that. All right, so as we start looking at it, again, very quickly, going back, you want to get a team, you want to have an assessment, what's your weaknesses, what's your strengths, how does everything operate, where are you at now? You want to look at writing the policy and processes. Then you want to basically go and test it and train it. And then you want to provide training to others within the organization. And, as we look at the powerful load de-escalation, active shooter training, whether that's, DHS, Alice, whatever other ones are out there, you just want something that's more proactive and not just a one solution response. That's really has your moving forward. And remember, your policies are never one and done. Your policy, whatever policy you write, and if anybody's in part of that policy writing group and committee of the organization, it's a living document. It will change. It needs to be reviewed. There's always new stuff coming up. So it's a living document. But these are the crisis or the baseline, the foundation of how you should be developing that. And again, this last page is just some other links for you all. The CISA.gov. Here's just something on topics for physical security. The protective security advisors. These are the ones that do the vulnerability assessments free of charge. I put you right out to This one will link you directly to the different regions. Again, you are regions 9 or 10, depending on where you're at. If you're in that Portland, Washington, upper west side, you guys are 10. If you're down in any of the California, I'm not sure exactly where we're all at there, but 9 and 10 is where you all want to be. And you will be able to access these, Steve, by the PDFs that will be coming out afterwards from Sherry. So that will all be accessed there, and that's kind of why I did it this way. And then DHS has a grant, because a lot of this is not cheap. I'm sure Randy's going to talk about that here. A lot of it can't, where are we going to get the money for some of our upgrades and all that. So DHS just came out with a new grant concept. They're looking at $278 million for grants for 2024. So that's a kind of a link out to those grants, and then emergency action plan, sorry. And then just for the insurance board, our Safety Central. There's a lot of good information and resources on a lot of the stuff that we run into on a day-to-day basis as part of the churches. And you can always find a lot of content and information there. And then you can always call our department. So again, I told you I was going to try to be fast. Again, I talk a lot. I apologize, Randy. Hopefully I was within my time span. But here's just our information, and you'll see all this when it comes later from Sherry. So if there's no questions, which I'm sure there's not, because we got to keep going, I will turn this over to Randy. Now I'm trying to stop it. Where's the stop button?
Probably on your side screen, more than likely. There you go. So, hi everybody, I'm Randy McCord, and I'm with Multnomah Presbyterian Church. And this was a topic that I won't say that we stumbled into, but we basically started this discussion through some questions that our session had. And so what I wanted to do today is just sort of go through sort of a little bit of the process that we're in. And so how did we get into this topic? How did we get organized? What did we do? And what have we learned so far? And we haven't approved anything, so we've got a lot ahead. We just had a session meeting last night, had a bunch more questions arise. And then I give you a summary of where we're going next. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit of a roadmap of at least our approach to this topic space. So let's just talk about sort of how we got started. At our session meeting in January, we've been talking about outside rental opportunities, and we were talking about how do we deal with security issues when we aren't necessarily the ones running the show or the events at our church. And that raised some questions about the need for security cameras, and some of which we already had. Many of us didn't even know we had them, but we had a group that had already done that. And what are we doing about doors and events, and what happens with unexpected arrivals? And it happened that we had a group of our finance and administration folks get access to some ALICE training through our insurance provider, and they had a wealth of information that it provided, and I'll summarize a little bit of that. So at the January meeting, instead of trying to solve it all at the meeting, we did the Presbyterian thing, we assigned a task force. And so we basically brought together myself and personnel with fellowship and finance and administration and buildings and grounds to form the task force. And then we added some interested individuals that had some expertise in certain things that like windows and whatever that might be helpful. And then we've met a couple of times per month. We've probably met now 4 times, and we'll be meeting again in a few weeks. And our hope is that hopefully by June or so, we'll be able to get ready for a draft to go to session. And we've been giving session updates as we go monthly as we've met. So what was the first thing that we did? Well, first thing seemed to make sense was to do an inventory of all of our doors. And so we built sort of I'm an engineer, so we had to build a spreadsheet. And so basically it identified each of the doors, what kind of door they were, whether they had glass in them or not. What kind of access should they be, or are they, in terms of primary, meaning main route of access for people coming to and from the church, or limited, more like a fire escape type door? And then how they're used on key events in terms of when they're unlocked. And that surfaced an issue that became sort of a policy issue that we're in the process of discussing, which is all doors remain locked unless they're monitored. And so one of the things that we're working our way through, originally, this was not really a topic space. And so accessibility and everything being open was really great. Now we're sort of looking at, okay, how can we balance these issues? And then there were issues of security in terms of monitoring and our existing positioning of, we have 7 CCTV cameras that are in place. And then in other places where we're talking about access, whether there was a doorbell or means of somebody who's coming in, maybe we're not monitoring that door, but we want to welcome them into the church, and how would we do that? And so we did a pretty extensive inventory to get to that point. And then the task force went to work sort of in 2 areas, and I'll start one on the part on the right, the other discussions. We basically are insurance company, sorry, Chad, this is Church Mutual, but they provided us a bunch of checklists and a bunch of material that we went through and did assessments. We were provided the FEMA materials and looked at things like evacuations and earthquakes and medical needs. We had a member of our task force that brother-in-law was a sheriff connected with the police bureau, and they were able to immediately come out and provide us vulnerability assessments, very timely. And then we've sort of observed other churches and went to Presbytery and asked for some assistance there. And that led to, on the left, sort of the outline of our work areas. And we established priorities focusing on our preschool, our youth programs, and Sunday services as areas where we wanted to look into security and access. We were focusing on addressing the door locking and key management strategies. And both those areas were not areas that we really had looked at before. And then we were looking at other things such as communication items like alarms and monitoring, and entry needs like doorbells and things of that nature, lighting, signing that we had, and then different training procedures. That sort of led us to the part, and I think Chad talked a little bit about this, of how can we set the right balance for being welcoming and inviting to people without it being scary. On the other side, making sure that we put our volunteers in a position, if you've coached kids sports, unexpected stuff happens, and when you're working with people that have been through that before, it just makes the volunteer experience so much better. But for our primary volunteers, our deacons and our elders and our meters and greeters, and many of them, if we put them in a position as a volunteer where something happens that makes them uncomfortable, it makes their volunteer experience not so good. So our intent was to sort of categorize how to group each of these issues. And so visitors and guests, our meters and greeters, are the lead to deal with them. We focus that group number one and first and foremost on being welcoming and inviting, and that's their focus. We're updating their procedures, and their job is to help sort of with screening and observing things, and do site walkarounds around the site on Sundays, and they'll be part of training. Then there's a next level of sort of an unexpected arrival. It's not like, threatening, but it's just an unexpected arrival. And the intent there was to focus on de-escalation and providing support. There's times, and we've heard this from the folks that came out and did our vulnerability assessment, most of the things that we're dealing with are folks that are coming in, they may be looking for money, or they've got questions, they need gas money, they have needs, and we're really looking at having them be comfortable and gathering information and helping them without it escalating into something that doesn't need to. And we'll be talking again about some training in that regard. And then the highest level, and I think Chad was talking about many of these, which would be more the questionable to threatening type arrival, where the focus becomes security, and our elders are the ones that we are focusing on communication, door management. The topic of active shooters, not one that we all want to deal with. and the training that goes with that. There were some real basic things beyond that, just, things like signs, cameras, and doorbells in our parking area, alarm notifications that come from our CCTV. We have a really sort of slick, people before I was on session put these in. It's called Easy Viz, and it's like on a cell phone app, and it shows the cameras. And as long as you got nearby power, and you've got Wi-Fi, it works really well, and it was very cost effective. And then we were really focused on areas, for example, outside of a Sunday service, our office and our youth building, in terms of access, and trying to figure out how to appropriately deal with those issues. And that sort of led us to where we are today, where we're drafting our plan, which has 3 components: a visitor planning aspect, an access and security strategy, and rental requirements. And you can see the access and security strategy's got a lot of stuff in it. The visitor planning and rental requirements are really just, establishing some roles and responsibilities and updating materials to make sure we've got those and monitoring for compliance. The access and security is where we get into some actionable areas of, door locking and windows security systems, doorbells, key management, expanding our CCTV, exterior lighting, signs, particularly signs dealing with accessible parking and getting to doors. Some of the doors in our accessible parking, our main door is not necessarily co-joined or adjacent, and so they're coming a long way, and we need to make sure we're providing accessibility for them. And doing our walkthroughs with police, and a lot of things they brought forward to us were making sure the windows were clear, that we were dealing with the access and the locking requirements, and being clear about being able to screen or just be observant in terms of people accessing while we're having events. And then we're building checklists for key events so that it makes it simple for folks. So it's very, we don't want to get too complex, too many pages, and the training that goes with that. And so where we're going next is we have a preschool on site. They have some policies in place, and we're now joining those together with the work that we've done. And then we're working on our guideline document, which right now is about 5 pages. It'll probably get longer as we gather more information, and it has an action plan built into it. But a lot of the things that it's talking about is having our finance and administration or building and grounds consider or review things. It's not coming up with necessarily the answer. It's coming up with, we need an answer. And then we'll go through session approval. And then ahead of us, and we've already learned this a bit, particularly when we started talking about the concept of the, all doors need to be locked if they're not monitored, is communication with our congregation, because that's sort of a change in operation, and make sure everybody understands it, some of the training and how to approach that with our volunteers to be very time efficient, so that people don't feel like, just another thing that's consuming time. And then the programming of elements and having our committees work on those elements as time goes by. So that pretty much gets you in a nutshell to where we are. So I think at this point, we're open for questions all around, Chad, myself, or actually it'd be very helpful. I know a lot of you all have probably done some of this, and I've got my book here, so I'm taking notes as fast as I can of things that we can add to our program as we go. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sherry. We can sort of monitor questions and comments from y'all.
Yeah, I see Peggy has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Randy, I'd like to hear just a little more about the site walk around you referred to earlier. It sounds like something that's going on during worship or something. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, that's a great point. That came up in our vulnerability assessment, and I think it might have been in one of the checklists as something that we should do when the first arrivals to the church on Sunday or for events, just to sort of check the grounds, just to sort of see what's in place. And then when we lock up and are leaving, do the same thing, just so that we have an assessment. And we thought that was pretty pragmatic, and it's not a big stretch for our volunteers. So we're now figuring that out. But it's basically just sort of doing a quick walk around the parking lot and the grounds, just to sort of see, where things are at. So we have a status of things at the start and at the end of an event.
Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that too. We do have a safety and security team. One of the things that we were encouraged by local law enforcement to do for that walk around is just to check all of the doors to make sure that there's nothing unusual stationed at the doors, or if someone has somehow secured the doors from the outside that would prevent people from evacuating the building in the event of an active shooter emergency. So just looking for anything unusual. The question I have is, so we've recently were having discussion with our safety and security team about open carry, concealed carry policies for churches. In a recent shooting event at a church down in Texas, there was a member of a security team that was able to stop a shooter from killing more people than what he did. And it was because they did have someone who concealed carried on their security team. I'm just wondering if you could discuss that with us a little bit.
Well, that subject did come up with our group, and I'll hand it over to Chad. And I think our belief was, and when we were talking with the police, they felt like that's a pretty high, if this is all the things you're dealing with, you're now way up in a high level situation. And some of the things that they had advised is maybe having, mace or some certain things in secure places that you can deal with this threatening type environment. Because most of us, like me, I mean, if somebody came in with a gun, I don't know. I mean, at this point, you got to figure out what you're going to do. And so as for, live carry firearms, the first thing out of everybody's mind was, is that inviting and welcoming in our environment? And the feeling was, that's probably not so much. So at this point, that wasn't part of where we're going. I don't know, Chad, how other churches are handling that.
No, and I'd like to answer this if I may. I know this is recording, and but there's my insurance side, and then there's the Chad explanation. So can I be dual personality with y'all for a moment? You're not going to hold me liable or responsible. So when it comes to this, Chris, this is a big topic that all churches deal with, even my church, right? The situation you're talking about in Texas, big mega church, correct? The two individuals who stopped that threat were actually law enforcement, off-duty law enforcement there. Different concepts from a volunteer having an open carry / CCW approach. When we look at it, and Randy's absolutely right, as a church congregation, if we have somebody who is an off-duty law enforcement officer, well, let me take it this way. From the insurance board perspective, we feel it is better for the church to have a third-party concept in place to take that rollover, i.e. off-duty law enforcement / sheriff officer on premises, right? They have been trained, they have the resources, and from an insurance, they're accepting some of that risk. Security, an actual security company, right, who comes on board that you are contracting with there, because now that risk and those challenges that you would have to deal with are now over to theirs. So we feel that it's much better for the church as a whole to kind of look at that from using a third party, like hiring off-duty law enforcement or security group, and trying to take that responsibility on internally. Okay, so that's that insurance side of the house. I want to share a personal side of the house. Again, 24 years in law enforcement. I was on the tactical team, been teaching Alice for a long, long time, doing a lot of different things. Even putting my team together at my facility at church, everybody wanted an armed approach. The challenge gets to be is there's a lot of training involved. There's a lot of accountability involved. And when we look at if we would actually all on this item, think about some of our volunteers, do we see them in that arena, right? Because there's a lot more to do. It is more efficient, safer to have a third party that we contract with, off-duty law enforcement security group, than it is to have our team internally. Now, I am a big proponent on a safety team as far as medical emergencies, having the training up front, because when we look at it, and Randy looked at it very, very well, and he kind of looked at the different phases, there's really 3 areas of safety we look at when we look at our property. We have the first zone 1 is that parking lot. All right, how are we watching our parking lots? Because if we can stop a threat in the parking lot, that's great, right? Any challenges in the parking lot. Then the next zone, our zones get smaller. The next zone is that front door. So that's our meters and greeters, right? So what are we, as Randy's group is doing, what tools are we providing them in order to communicate and interact in a positive way with people that are coming in? And that's where that power of hello comes into play, all right, with our meters and greeters and some of that de-escalation. And I think they've done a great job putting those plans together. And then that third part is that sanctuary, right? That sanctuary or our kids area. And what do we have in place there to communicate and then to buy time? And that's really what we want to look at is what do we have in place to give us time to respond to what those actions are? And sometimes it's what are we training our civilian population to do in order to respond to these type of events, right? And that's our congregations. What training are we providing there? So that's not a short answer, I know, and there's much more, but get me offline and we can talk more on it. But that's how we feel. I think a third party is the way to go when it comes to that. And you guys are struggling with the same questions that all congregations are doing it all over the United States. Good question, Chris. I was hoping we not be able to get. I was hoping we could do this whole thing without that coming up, but at least we got it out of the way up front.
No, you helped
I
me answer the question for ourselves greatly, so thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is the budget issue, because once you go to the third party, you've got a budget line item now that for some of our congregations, it's an indivisible line item.
It is.
It's not scalable.
It can be, and I look at that, and again, coming from personal aspects of it, an off-duty law enforcement hour is just usually it's either a set rate or an overtime rate, and it's usually a 2 to 3 hour concept. But when we take that concept compared to what we might have to do with insurance or what we might have to do with the concept of when it happens, it actually does become quite small when we look at that. But you're absolutely right, Randy. You know, budget always comes down to what can we afford as a budget, and not all congregations and churches are the same. We have some big ones here, and I'm sure we have some small ones that they're listening to us going, "Holy moly, how in the world am I going to get all that?" There's 30 of us, and you know, So we'll talk about that as we go on, some other options before we hang up here. Who's next? Sorry.
Daniel?
Oh, not Daniel again. He has hard questions. Oh man.
We've been at this for a number of years. We had a transient walk in and disrupt church pretty bad, and so this all came on. And then shortly that Alice training came out. But we're a small church west of Portland, and our volunteer is a volunteer group. It's not actually the church being part of the function. We are a group of volunteers that got together, decided we're going to do security with the church. Had the Washington County deputies come out and do an assessment. And one of their highest things they could give us was, if you have somebody outside all the time, 99% of the people that are going to come bother the church will drive by because they don't want to interact with somebody right away. So we've got 2 small parking lots. We can see them from the church, and we have somebody outside every day. And it's just a group of volunteers that rotate. So it works very good with us in a small group, and it's worked real well. But we do appreciate the information we get through things like this because it's been very valuable for us.
And again, Daniel, I think what we need to look at with that also is it's not through the church, but if something does happen, how are you guys? It's a response aspects, right? Where are you putting your team there? What liabilities? What are we doing? And again, this is a side comment that I'm making, but those are things to think about as our volunteers coming through.
Correct. So we go back to the carry or not carry thing. That's the individual's responsibility to either have training or insurance or whatever. If you are at the church and you're volunteering to help with a wedding or whatever, it's the same kind of insurance if you're doing the security volunteer. That's what we got out of the insurance company when we first started that. And that's why we
Okay.
set it up like that.
Excellent. Yeah, if the insurance has something that's going to protect you on that, that's a different animal. But usually it's a different form policy that you have to go
You know,
through.
it's
All
a,
right, excellent.
Daniel, that's an interesting idea, because I know our accessible parking is maybe 100 feet away from the door. It's not like right front, maybe it's 150. It's a bit away. And having somebody outside that could observe that, I mean, on a weekly basis, that's important to us. But also, if that's a deterrent, there's a dual benefit effectively of having somebody outdoors. I mean, in the wintertime in the rain, it's not so cool, but fortunately we have a little bit of an awning. So, but that's an interesting idea. Thank you.
Steve?
Steve, next.
Oh, sorry,
Hi,
Chad.
everybody. I'm Steve Marker from Smith. I normally sit out in the lobby every Sunday with my wife. We have a security person on the grounds as you're entering our driveway. And I have a walkie-talkie with me, and him and I communicate with each other. And I've spoken with my pastor a couple times about, because I do have a concealed carry permit and stuff like that. And the other thing, besides being an elder, I'm also a city councilor for the city of Fairview. So I pretty much know all the police and the police chief and stuff like that. And my feeling is when you are carrying a gun, that's an extra step of protection for you. But the thing that I always have to remember, and the thing that I always tell myself, is if I use that gun, I cannot recall that bullet back into the gun. I can't say, get back here, it shouldn't have went. And I got to remember that that bullet can turn around and take somebody's life. Would I want that? But at the same time, I have to think about my congregation, and that I don't want any of those people hurt. So for me, it's a fine line, and it's something for not just me to think about, but for everybody who does a security for their church, for them to turn around and think about also. Thank you.
No, I agree with you, Steve. Very good points. Very good point.
I would like to go to a question in the chat from Chris Gruey. What do you see as the tolerance of fear as a component in these plans? Active shooter and news stories are scary for congregation members.
Yeah, and I mean, if we kind of think about this topic in general, when we all got on, there's always a little fear, isn't there? There's always a fear of the unknown because we don't know what's going to happen. And in today's world of social media and media as it is, what do? We press it out there. We hear of everything, we know of everything, and it does provide a sense of dread or fear. The bigger component of combating that fear is communication and education. Being an educator, training people, it's amazing to see just from an active shooter response training. So everybody knows that it seems like everybody's been through the Alice training, or majority of you have or know it, or just that concept. But when I've done training with basically situational awareness training, and I teach a female self-defense class every month for people in our county through the prosecutor's office is kind of a volunteer concept that I do because I think that's very, very important. It's amazing to see when the light comes on, when we provide them information, when we provide them guidance on what to expect, then it's like, all right, even if it happens, I have a plan in place, right? Have a plan, know a plan, practice a plan, and I can move into it. But it's the time where we become the ostrich with our head in the sand, where we're not listening to what's going on and we're not communicating about it, that the fear gets to go more and more. And then they wonder, what more do we have? So when we talked about, and Randy's doing a great job with it with his group, is kind of once we have a plan, we share the plan with others. Let them know that you have something going on. Just, again, where I attend, we have events all over the place, and we just have a safety team. We're unarmed. We don't do anything with that. We have processes in place. but just from being observed, people feel more comfortable, right? Because they know somebody's there who's going to communicate. So Steve talked about communication with the security group out on the parking lot or the officer. Perfect. Communication is the number one thing we should have in any type of situation when it comes to safety. But the more we provide that, the better people feel, because then they feel I can do something, or there's a plan where I'm attending that they have a plan in place that's going to do something for me. But it's when we try to hide things that people have that higher rate of fear. Does that kind of help, Chris? Where did Chris go? I'm trying to find Chris. There he is, right in the middle. All right, good. Good. I saw you nodding, so I must have I didn't look at the name there real quick. Excellent. All right, Sherry.
Lindsay.
Hey guys, Randy, thank you so much for sharing with us, and please send a big thank you to your team too, because I know that it's vulnerable and scary to share what you're doing, especially when you haven't even gotten it approved by session yet, it sounds like. So thank you. My question kind of follows up on the fear question, so I'm glad you brought that up, Sherry. Randy, how, and Chad, you can answer this too. Randy, how have you all talked about practicing and communicating? I know you're not there yet because it needs session approval, but how have you all talked about how you would practice this plan, communicate this plan? Like, I'm imagining, like, is it a fire drill on a Sunday morning, or what does that look like?
Well, you know, it's actually, I know our preschool does do that. They actually do go through that, and they have safe rooms and things of that nature that they've got set up. And so the next step is sort of taking that to the congregational level, and how does that go? And I think, you know, what we learned actually in our meeting the other day was this issue of locked in, less monitored. We really hadn't set that. So we know communication is going to be really key as we go through this, and leaving open the idea that people can, you know, share their thoughts along the way. So the plan's really not final, even though we approve it. It's really the next step, which is to operationalize it and then gather comments and refine it. And so at this point, I don't think, yeah, we're not intending to do like a church, you know, evacuation drill, but the intent is to have people trained. And that's where I think we're really going to be focusing the next couple of years on, is what does that mean? Some of that will probably be incorporated into our, we have a retreat in February where the elders meet. So when the elders meet, we'll probably do a portion of it there just to have it re-upped and refreshed. And then we have a joint meeting with our deacons, and we'll probably try to do it there and try to basically co-join. So we're not creating more, you know, we could get volunteers in and then it's like we pile more meetings on them. We don't want to do that. We want to be
Right.
respectful of their time, but at the same time, figuring out a uniform way. And we have our newsletter goes out monthly, and we have a weekly e-blast, and we'll probably be using those as a routine means of communicating. And not the most scary stuff, obviously. I mean, the intent isn't to scare folks away, but to say, you know, we do have folks, and making sure they're aware of who to go to, you know, who are the leaders. And, you know, the thing I picked up from today's meeting is we hadn't gotten to the point of creating a security team, but we probably will have that established as we get through this. So that'll probably be one of the things.
Yeah, it seems like a real balance between building awareness without, you know, really freaking people
Fear.
out. Yeah.
Stay away from the fear. And
Yes.
it's hard. And I think the police helped us a bit with that, you know, scaling the risks of, you know, what could happen. And I mean, the reality of an active shooter, I'm going to go to the Camas Fields and look at some flowers in West Lynn, and there could be one there. There could be one, you know,
Right.
when I go to Trader Joe's, there could be, I
Right.
mean, it can happen anywhere. And so the reality is, you know, I think taking that disproportionately out of scale is a quick way to get people more to build fear, and we don't want to do that. On the same hand, we do want to be thoughtful about, you know, what those risks are. And, you know, the idea that, you know, providing stuff in our, I think some of the ideas were in our AV booth and some of the places near the front entryway where people could be equipped with certain things that could slow things, or at least address, you know, the most violent or significant issues and slow them down and give people a chance. And I think that's what we're looking to do is, you know, we got a lot of exit points. Everybody can see those and provide opportunities. And I think, you know, the out of all the stuff we're doing, frankly, the thing I think is most important was the door locking and monitoring. I
Right.
just think we'd let that get a little bit out of hand. And I mean, it's a volunteer group and everybody wants to be able to get in, and the next thing they got a key and then they share a key with somebody, and it's like, nah, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of simple stuff, but it's hard. It's hard to keep track of it. So thank you
Yeah.
for giving us some ideas.
Yeah, one of the simplest things, and this came from the vulnerability assessment, is wherever you have offices and windows, is make sure all your electronics and valuables, if you either pull the shades, keep the shades pulled when you're not there, or keep anything of any value out of the line of, what a dog doesn't see, they don't bark at.
Mm.
And so effectively, we're thinking real heavily about that. That's why you saw in our inventory, we had these doors with glass, because we're trying to figure out how to, what the sight lines are. We can't shade those. So, what do we put in the line of sight of those different from a window that we can pull shade?
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
And if I can just
Oh,
add
I-
real quick to that, Randy hit it spot on, but for everybody, just as we talk about things, and Chris kind of said it in the chat, as you're doing these exercises, the communication's out, you can still be lighthearted on a heavy topic. Again, I've trained all over the United States, this type of topic, and I use humor. Not very good. I know you guys have witnessed that already in the last hour, but using that lightheartedness does help people understand that there's a way that you can look at this type of situation and have a plan, communicate it, understand it, that there are options that we have, and we can mitigate those casualties and be able to respond on more. And again, this topic always comes up heavy, but when we really look at safety of a church, it's kind of, this is the smallest event probably that would happen with the biggest impact that we're talking about now. Everybody agree with that? On a day-to-day basis, we're probably going to end up dealing with more of that person coming into our church facility, right? An upset parishioner, somebody from the outside wanting to come in, right? Break-ins, those kind of things. So those items are probably going to be more frequency. Severity might not be as high, but the frequency is going to be high that we're going to deal with, to where, a violent critical incident is low frequency, but high return for them, more on that severity, the severity of it when we look at the risk. So as we look at it, people yelling and screaming at each other, being upset, those kind of things is probably what we're going to deal with more in the frequency item, more than the other when we look at it. So always keep those in mind and explaining those, but always have a plan in place, know the plan, and practice the plan.
Yeah.
I feel like a
I
broken
think
record,
Pete,
but I
Pete
like to.
had a chat item on that same level, and he sort of set the quite extremely low, quite high, and we are going through that sort of. I think the key thing is what Chad said, is this de-escalation, and then getting people. And again, I'll go back to coaching kids sports. Stuff happens, it catches you flat-footed, and it's like, whoa, and you don't even know what to do half the time as volunteers. And so what we're trying to do is take some of that away to make the volunteer experience better. And so particularly for the things that would be more repetitive, where it's de-escalation, what does that mean? And who's good at that? Because I might not be good at it, but there's other people that might be. And so we're going through that kind of a thing to make sure we have people that are, have better skills in that area. There's some people that don't have those. And so just make sure we don't mismatch those with our volunteers. And then there was another question on CCTV cameras. I think I mentioned that EasyViz was what we were using. If I was, and they was asking what we'd be looking for, I can tell you what we looked for was obviously inexpensive, was top of the list, simple to install, and what we learned was near power and good with Wi-Fi. And then a simple app on a phone, which is what we have, and multiple people that can monitor it. So it's not just, in the office and that's it. And those were things that were pretty readily available. And we had a fellow in our church that was able to go through that and provide this. And we're very fortunate. That just worked out really well. It's not perfect, but it clearly has met our need.
And Chris, I see
So-
that you have your hand up, but I'm sorry, Sherry. I thought it was Amanda Golbick. Did you have your hand up and then you brought it down? I know we were talking too much and your hand got tired being up there digitally, and then we'll come over to you, Chris, if that's all right. Excellent.
No, that's fine. I mean, and you may not be able to answer. I guess I'm just curious if there's any resources from you, Chad, for churches. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of talk about Sundays. And I've been in churches where we make a plan for Sundays, but my current context, really where we are most vulnerable is the other 6 days of the week, where we have a gazillion community groups that are out literally hourly coming through our building, and we have a preschool and we have a coffee shop. And so I'm just wondering if there's resources to help us figure out I mean, how do you create a plan for a group of people in which they will not know the plan, and the congregation ultimately isn't here to enact a plan?
Okay.
And there's just, like 3 staff members at a time, or sometimes only 1 staff member actually in the building. And how do we even go about thinking through that?
Man, you're right up there with Daniel, Amanda. Geez, Louise, you guys close by. Good hard questions. I love it. So I always tell people, don't let the structure or the name of the structure dictate how we do things. So a security plan, emergency plan is an emergency plan. As we write it, we just write it for those different areas. And then if I have somebody coming into my facility, I should probably have a facility use agreement with them, having to make sure their COI is on staff, and I should be reviewing your expectations of them while they're on your campus. For instance, here's our emergency operations plan. This is what we expect you to do. If there's a fire, if there's a tornado, if there's an earthquake, whatever the case may be, right? This is what we have in place for you. Many churches are considered commercial, and a lot of commercial items, they're having maps, right? On the walls, we see them at hotels and different things for evacuation, but those are nice for churches, all right? Because again, we have visitors that come into our facility. We want visitors to come see us. They might not understand how to get out. They might not see those illuminated doors that says exit on them, right? That we should all have, right? Everybody do this, please. Remember, I'm risk management for an insurance company. I like to see that. Okay. So looking at the coffee shop, if it's owned by a third party, what's our contract with them, right? Do we have that covered? And here's the portfolio, so to speak, of what we expect from you. Because if somebody's coming to use your facility, even if they're paying, if they're not paying, they should respect what you want them to do. How do you want them to act? How do you want them to respond? So all that goes in the same plan, and you just take sections out of your emergency operations plan and be able to provide them with it. So we have those same concepts. You can go on our Safety Central and get different things, or the CISA.gov or DHS.
Yeah, one thing I forgot, it was just triggered a thought, was on the doors. The police and the vulnerability assessment mentioned motion detectors and lights. If we had 3 spots that were sort of around the corners or behind things that didn't have lights, and they encouraged us to consider exterior motion detector type lights, which again, that was just something we hadn't even thought about. And when they brought it up, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so some simple things like that, there's a lot to learn through those vulnerability assessments.
Agreed. All right, Chris, it's your turn again.
Nope, sorry.
Nope.
I'm facilitating this meeting here, so I'm going to butt in. On behalf of our smaller churches that really don't have the resources or the bandwidth or the knowledge to accomplish a lot of these things that you're talking about, which are, really great, but what could you tell us, just what are like the 3 top things they can do to keep their congregation safe on a Sunday? Just quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one, have a plan in place. Write a plan that people know what to follow. You don't have to have a big group, a big committee. You can bring a couple people together, especially if we only have 20 to 30, maybe, that show up on our meetings. So kind of getting a plan together, reach out to local law enforcement, have them help you. Most law enforcement agencies have a crime prevention, community policing aspect. They will help you. Reach out also to the security representative from CISA that I talked about in your regions. They will come in and provide things free of charge. So they will bring their expertise to you for the vulnerability, and they will do other trainings. They can look at it there. So look at your community who's in your community to assist you in developing these. And everything is online. It's just a little bit of reading to look at those. And we have some stuff for templates that you can use off of our website. Again, doesn't matter if we insure you or not, I don't care. But really looking at just what's our policy, how are we going to respond to these events, right? And what is that process going to look like? And how are we going to bring other outside agencies like law enforcement, fire, emergency management of the city, right? They are all city employees, right? They're there to help you, especially as a nonprofit, and be able to look at that. And again, if you're looking, while we might need, I just talked to an insured a group today about, they need some work done, but they don't have the event because they're a small church, right? Looking at some of those grants that are out there that will assist you in getting those items. And I think those are the big part. But again, just having a plan is the big part, and using those resources. Folks, as church and nonprofits, we have resources that are just there waiting to help you. You just got to reach out and get them. Law enforcement, fire, emergency management, and they will help you through the processes you want. Is that okay? Was that
Okay,
fast enough?
Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to say, while the active shooter gets a lot of the attention, the thing we're most likely going to confront is a medical emergency. Someone slips and falls as they're coming into church, or someone has a heart attack or has a stroke in the midst of worship. So I think those are the things that we probably really need to spend a lot of our attention on, making sure that our congregations are trained on how to deal with those issues. So
I
we can
agree.
probably all relate to that.
Yeah. What's your process? Who's in charge? Who's going to handle it? Is it the greeters, meters? Who is that? Absolutely. That's part of that emergency part that I was talking about earlier. 100% spot on. Thank you.
I think we've addressed most of the questions in the chat. If you feel like we didn't, can you raise your hand and go ahead and reiterate it? Otherwise, we do realize that we're already 8 minutes over, but it does seem like a really beneficial conversation. Julie.
Hi, thank you. I just had a question about how do we help support our congregations that may be elderly, have difficulty moving. In the case of even a fire drill, much less an active shooter situation. If you have any tips or pointers for that.
I guess that's me. I was waiting for Randy. I was hoping Randy had all the answers.
I'm
and I could just
writing,
sit
I'm
here
writing notes down. That's a good one.
In the
I
worst
like that
case
one.
scenario,
Yeah.
if the right response is run and we can't, what can we do to help in that scenario?
Well, again, I think it depends on what our situation is, right? What's the scenario? Is it a fire? Well, we need to get out. So do we have other congregants assist? When I used to teach in a lot of churches, I would always explain that maybe we reposition those that have challenges in moving quickly closer to the exits. And we all know that once you tell somebody they can't sit in the same spot they have for the last 30 years, it's downhill, because we all have our spots, don't we? I'm going to see this all the time. We all have, I'm fourth row, first seat in the middle. If I go somewhere else, I can't listen, right? So trying to, to ask about repositioning is one. Looking at where our exits are so they're aware of it. Again, trying to move as efficiently as possible, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And there's really not a true, this is the answer to do, because everybody's so different. That makes sense, Julie. And I'm not trying to make excuses for no answers, but we want them either closer to the exits, more on the ends instead of the middle, because the middles, especially if we have pews, are harder to get out of than the ends are. We want them to be able to use whatever items they have for mobility. So if they have, canes or their walkers and all that they're nearby. So how are we situating those aspects? So there's a lot of different little things you can do to help supplement that. And sometimes if If we can't move, then what else are we doing? Are we countering? If it's a violent critical incident, are we, doing something else as we start to move that way? Because sometimes you don't have to move fast, you just have to be moving to do it, especially if the threat is inside. If the threat is outside of our area, then we control the area as much as we can by controlling the doors and giving us time then for those that have mobility challenges to be able to move out. So that's a couple ways to do that. I know it doesn't totally help, and I've never had a good answer for that over the years, but it's just, those are some ideas to go with.
And I'll remind everyone too at this point that we are recording this meeting, and we will send out a link to the recording in case you need to jump and want to, or check up on anything later on, or share it with anyone. All right, Paul.
Oh, thank you. I'm the stated clerk for this presbytery, and my question might seem a little outside the norm for most of our congregations, but the Presbyterian Church has been encouraging congregations or entities to hold events to eliminate firearms from the general society, called Guns to Gardens, where people would bring firearms to a church or to another place, and they would be disabled, disarmed, turned into something that is no longer a firearm. And we've been wondering about just risks related to that, as well as just even finding insurance for that, of course. Do you have any thoughts on things we should think about before jumping on that bandwagon?
So I am not an insurance person. I'm a risk manager person. So I don't know policies or any of that. Let me start with that. Even though I stayed at Holiday Inn Express last week, I still am not that. I'm not those areas, right? So let's talk about the risk though. Everything you talked about is bringing weapons on our campus. Let's just break those down in a couple terms. Weapons on our campus, unloading them, and taking them apart. Does that seem like a high skill level or low skill level to be able to do that? Probably a high skill level, right? It's a high skill level. So it's something that is a very high skill level. Most of our volunteers and group church people are not really trained in that, so to speak. And it's not something that I feel as an individual who's dealt as a firearms trainer for 20 years, still am, that is something that is there. So we've had these questions before. I think the biggest part to support that ministry is to really support another group to kind of do it off campus. So to me, if we're dealing with firearms on campus, who would be the best people to interact with firearms? Police. Thank you. Right? Law enforcement. So are we partnering with law enforcement to have it there, but we can help with paperwork, or we can have our volunteers go to them, having it as a third party somewhere else to where we go there to support. Because remember, accidents happen. And the number one challenge is everybody gets comfortable, because I've had weapons, I've done this or that, and it only takes one time for an accidental discharge to go off. And now we have a challenge going on within our group. And I'm not even talking insurance. I'm talking people's psychological aspect. What's the reputation of the church? If an event happens, right? How are we responding and recovering from those aspects? So I think to support the ministry, it's good, but just trying to support it off campus, right? Let's have it at the police department, and we'll co-host it with you.
Yeah,
right?
do the promotion of it, but the police
We
run it.
promote, we'll give you a couple people, but let's have it at the police department, and police department are there. They're there to handle the actual tools, right? And putting the processes together, because there's a lot to the processing of how you should do that, and how that concept goes away. So I think to support that ministry, that's how I would guide you to do that, is to support it on a third group, kind of off campus, and allowing that to go to where it's going to be more safe for everybody involved.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hope I didn't offend anybody on that one, but that's more of a Chad concept. But I want everybody to be safe. Even in
That
training
one's
individuals.
that one's a little bit more exciting than a recycling,
Yeah.
James recycling event on our
We
campus.
look at risk, absolutely. Yep.
Marta,
Yeah, thank you. We're at Westminster in Eugene, where there's a few of us on the Zoom. One question I just had, because I heard a few of you talk about having a preschool in your building, and we do as well. We have a preschool in our building, but at the same time, we also have other things going on in the building while the kids are on campus. So I was just curious if those of you with preschools, if your preschools were secured from the rest of the building.
I can talk about Multnomah Pres. We have basically the preschool's on the lower level, and it has, well, there's a separate door that seals it off, and then we have a safe room separate, all on the lower level. But people can get up above, but those areas are sealed off to the office and to the other spaces, and so we feel like we're okay. There was discussion about that, about whether that area needed to be secured so that you couldn't get in. And there's one door that we're looking at, possibly some rebuild to deal with that issue.
Okay, thank you. And I see some people responding in the chat, so thanks a lot.
Just when you have any type of school or concept there, you always want to try to make sure it is separate from everybody else and controlled. You want that to be a controlled environment. Think about your abuse prevention policies that everybody has in place, right? For vulnerable populations. Well, preschools and stuff is that we want those to be controlled and have access only for those who should be in there. It's controlled access and keeps that outside of it. This is where your vulnerability assessment too will assist you also as they come out and do those, if you have those on campus. That's why they're so important, I think, very important to have.
and tell us again who does our vulnerability assessments for us?
That would be the CISA group.
Assist group. Mhm.
Yep. And
Okay.
the name of it would be the Protective Security Advisors, PSA for short.
And we will go ahead and include that in our wrap-up email as well, so people will have it at their fingertips.
Yeah, we had ours done by the City of Portland Police
Either way,
Bureau
yep.
in our central precinct.
Yeah. Law enforcement, either one.
Okay, well, I don't see any more hands or questions in the chat, but people seem to be very grateful to you, Chad and Randy. And on behalf of the Presbytery, we are grateful as well. Thank you for your time and efforts into putting these presentations together and your bandwidth in answering our questions. We do have